Welcome back. Next month marks 41 years since TWA Flight 514 crashed in Mount Weather, Virginia. That crash had an unprecedented impact on aviation as we know it today. Our Jay Korf picks up the story.
And the total impact area probably runs 700 to 800 yards in depth.
On December 1st, 1974, TWA Flight 514 slammed into the top of Mount Weather, which is along the rugged western edge of Loudoun County. 85 passengers and 7 crew members were killed.
How could this happen, this devastating accident?
You don't hear much about this crash, but in truth, what this nation learned coming out of this air disaster proved to be a critical turning point in aviation safety history.
It wasn't long after this and ground proximity warning systems were mandated in airliners.
On that fateful day 41 years ago, there was plenty of blame to go around. The National Transportation Safety Board determined there had been a tragic miscommunication between the flight crew and the air traffic controller. Mistakes, if not corrected, would lead to more airline disasters. You can watch this powerful story by going online to WJLA.com, where a short documentary called Diverted TWA 514 is being shown exclusively.
Anytime I'm in mountainous terrain or I read about safety reports, I know that they're with me when I'm flying today with myself, my crew, and my passengers.
And reporter Jay Korf joins us now. Jay, this is such a great work. Congratulations on having gotten it across the finish line. I know this was something you worked hard on with Van Applegate and a colleague here and worked on for a long time. This is something that is so well known within the industry and not well known, I suspect, among the great majority of people who live within shouting distance of the place where this plane went down.
That is so true, Bruce, and thank you so much for having us on so that we can get more information about this crash. And that was one of the things that we confronted. We knew very little about this, but Van was actually walking on the Appalachian Trail and decided to take a different route, started walking down Route 601, and he comes across this makeshift memorial and sees a little plaque and realizes what had happened. That was about 3 years ago. Then he started to do the research. He comes to me and he says, whoa, man, there is an incredible story to tell out there. And it really is remarkable. I mean, any pilot, anybody in the aviation industry literally studies this crash because this crash changed everything.
Why?
Basically, planes were flying into hillsides and flying into mountains at an alarming rate in the 1960s and early 1970s. You may remember the Marshall Thundering Herd. Most of their football team was killed on a Southern Airways crash in Huntington, West Virginia 4 years earlier. There's a device called a ground proximity warning system, GPWIS. It's the fundamental device that allows you to know how close you are to the ground. And the reason why this was happening was because commercial planes did not have ground proximity warning devices on. The NTSB was screaming at the FAA and screaming at the industry to get these on. And they were finding out in almost a dozen crashes 10, 15 years prior that these ground proximity warning devices would have prevented these crashes. So that was the big thing that came out of this crash. The NTSB basically said the federal government has to mandate, they're called GPWISs, going onto planes, and it has made flying exponentially safer since then.
Imagine the scramble when a airliner filled with people goes down in a remote area and folks have to come with no advance warning, of course, to this difficult-to-reach place in a desperate effort to save as many lives as possible, if any are indeed surviving, if anyone has survived to be saved.
And we have learned coming out of this, after we posted the story online at WJLA.com, we've gotten a flood of reaction from people from all over the area, in fact, all over the country, many people who lived here at the time. Maybe their father was a doctor who rushed to the scene. Maybe their uncle was in the search and rescue team. And what's so sobering and so disturbing about a crash like this is that they figured out
and the total
almost immediately that there was no hope, that everybody, I mean, the plane flew about 240 miles an hour-ish right into a mountain, and there was a giant boulder that it slammed into, and they had no chance.
Why did you call this project Diverted?
These people would have survived if it wasn't for, there was a horrible storm that rolled in that day, in that morning, and at a very important moment in the flight coming out, it started in Columbus, then went to Indianapolis. These were all people coming home from Thanksgiving, spending time with their loved ones. An en route from Indy into They were supposed to fly into Reagan, but at the last moment the flight was diverted to Dulles. Dulles wasn't that much of a used airport at that time. There weren't a whole lot of people, there weren't a whole lot of air traffic controllers that were in the tower at that time either, because it was diverted. And unfortunately, it was almost like a perfect storm, if you will. The pilot and the co-pilot had next to no experience flying into Dulles. The pilot had only been in there once, the co-pilot had only been in there twice. And there's a mountain in the way. And essentially what happened is the plane, due to a catastrophic miscommunication between air traffic control and the pilots and their inexperience, and confusing charts, confusing terminology, all these things were changed in the coming year. They basically descended too low too soon. And because there was no visibility, Bruce, there was a storm. They didn't see that there was a mountain right in front of them.
Amazing. This is something where you mentioned this incident, this event, to an airline pro. Someone
yeah.
They immediately, the import of it jumps out. They know immediately we're talking
like
about
when pilots go to pilot school, there are a series of crashes that occurred in the 1960s into this crash. There were, I think, 3 or 4 in particular from 70 to 74 in which the same scenario was happening. And we actually have a very experienced commercial pilot who talks about, you know, every pilot learns about this so that they don't make the same mistake. And of course now, the navigation systems on planes, they have multiple navigation systems. They're very sophisticated. You know, this thankfully is not happening.
Give us one element of this that folks will find that maybe we haven't touched on yet. We have about 45 seconds left in terms of how you told this story, you and Van.
I would say that more than just the facts and the figures, this is about the changes that came out of aviation. But Bruce, even more than that, it's about the impact that this had on so many people's lives. Mm-hmm. Not only on the remarkable people who died in that crash, but the ripple effect that this had on so many families, ripped apart so many families. And it took us so long to do this, Doc, because we had to track down families all across the country. And we couldn't have told this story without them. Their stories are very powerful.
Diverted, Flight 514, available online at WJLA.com. We hope you'll check it out after the show. Jay Korff, your colleague, Van Applegate, great work. Congratulations again. Thanks very much for your time. We'll step aside. Back with the program note after this.